Hello everyone, my name is Sahas Barve and I am the Program Director of Avian Ecology at Archbold Biological Station, and today we are going to talk about and learn about bird anatomy. Welcome to this course, welcome to this lecture. So let's talk about anatomy, what birds are made of. And I wanted to start with a really cool bird actually, and that bird is the bar-tailed godwit, and we're going to talk about shorebirds. And this bird, the bar-tailed godwit, has one of the longest migration routes of any bird in the world. And the story I'm about to tell you is a great testament to the millions of years of evolution that birds have gone through in order to sort of become really well adapted in the niches that they live in today. So the bird I'm going to talk to you about is this one bird that flew about 13,000 kilometers from Alaska to Tasmania nonstop. That bird was a 4-month-old bar-tailed godwit named B6, and that bird flew nonstop 11 days to complete its fall migration to its wintering sites in Tasmania. Isn't that really crazy and fun? And so, just to put that in context, 13,000 kilometers in 11 days is like flying to Mumbai to Delhi every day, a distance between Mumbai and Delhi every day. So, Bartil Godwits are just a great example of how some birds and their anatomy is incredibly well adapted to do really things that many, very few animals can do. Okay, so let's dive in to try and understand all the different adaptations birds have in their anatomy to help them fly and forage and do all the things that birds do. Let's start with their skeletons. Birds have an extremely well adapted skeleton for flight, and we'll think about and talk about several things that makes bird skeletons really strong, but at the same time really light. And I'm going to point out a few things here that makes bird skeletons special. So here, the first thing I want to talk about is the furcula. And the furcula is a fusion of the collarbones of the bird. So our collarbones, our clavicles are not fused together into one, but bird collarbones are actually fused together into the furcula, which is also known as the wishbone. In birds. And so in if you've eaten chicken, you can see the wishbone in the chicken. The next cool adaptation birds have is that their ribs and their vertebrae are actually fused together. Our ribs and vertebrae are attached to each other by connective tissue, and but bird vertebrae and ribs are actually fused together. Again, that gives their skeleton a lot of strength, and while being really light. The next thing is the synsacrum, which is a fusion of the sacrum and the pelvic bone. So our backbone and our pelvic bones are not fused together. They're connected again by connective tissue. But birds have this one fused synsacrum, which again gives them a lot of really cool abilities like jumping around. And that fused synsacrum absorbs a lot of force and absorbs a lot of the or gives the ability for birds to jump really high and jump up and down a lot. Their hands are also all fused into one bone, right? So the our fingers, we have five separate fingers, right? Bird fingers are actually all fused into one, and that is where the primary feathers, which are the flight feathers for all birds, are actually connected to that fused hand. So all the phalanges of the birds are fused, and that's an important attachment point for all bird flight feathers. The last thing I'm going to talk about is the pygostyle. And the pygostyle is really important because Bird tails do not have bones like mammal tails. So if you look at bird tails are pretty much all is completely made up of feathers, while mammal tails actually have vertebrae, right? So they have caudal vertebrae or tailbones that go all the way to the end of the tail. So the tailbone in birds is called a pygostyle, and it's fused vertebrae. So they don't actually have a very long vertebrae. Extinct dinosaurs and extinct avian dinosaurs did have caudal vertebrae. So what makes bird bones really light and strong at the same time? There is a some people mention to bird bones as hollow, but they're not actually hollow. Have big air pockets, and there is really cool connections between these air pockets. So here's a bird bone, and here's a human bone, and as you can see, bird bones have these huge air pockets, but at the same time, these connections that make them strong, but at the same time light, and this is called a pneumatic avian bone. So those those bones with big air pockets are actually called pneumatic bones, not hollow bones with air pockets. Bird bones also ossify slowly, just like mammal bones. And this here is a great example of a bird that has, well, less ossified bone. So you can see that the skull bone is actually translucent in this case, and this is a completely ossified bone. And that bone ossification is a great way of knowing how old the bird is. So in many birds, you can age a bird as being a subadult because their skull bones are not fully ossified. And you can just blow on the bone when you're ringing the bird. You can blow on the head and see if the skull is ossified or not. The final really cool part about bird skeletons is what is called the carina of the keel bone. So birds have a keel bone, a sternum, just like us, but they have these extremely keeled sternums, and that keel is called the carina. And that carina is a really great indicator of how important flight is for that bird. So here on the left we have the breastbone or the sternum of a emu, which is a large flightless bird in Australia, and on the right we have a skeleton of a pigeon, which is, of course, as you know, really good flyers, long distance flyers. And you can see that the pigeon's sternum is highly keeled, and that increased surface with the keel gives the pigeon's body the ability to put down a lot of big, bulky flight muscles. So all flighted birds have huge pectoral muscles that connect at the sternum along that keel in the carina. And so the more flighted a bird is, the deeper the keel of the bird. And uh, the the emu, which is a flightless bird, has a almost non-existent carina or keel on its sternum, but flighted birds have a deeply keeled big carina which allows for attachment of flight muscles. Birds also have an open pelvis, and this allows birds to lay really large eggs. And so this is an example this is an X-ray of a kiwi, a bird that is a flightless bird that lives in New Zealand, is endemic to the New Zealand islands. And kiwis lay the biggest egg proportional to their body size. And look at how huge that egg is inside that female's body. The open pelvis of the birds allows them to lay these giant eggs, but thankfully, as you will find out later in the lecture, birds don't carry their eggs around for a long time, and they can only carry one egg at a time. And so don't mammal females carry large fetuses around for much longer than birds carry around eggs. One of the tools of the trade for a bird is its beak, and bird beaks are very different from mammal mouths because they don't have teeth. Now, that is not to say that no avian dinosaurs ever had teeth. In fact, many extinct lineages of birds had teeth, but for some reason, the birds that made it through the KT boundary, which is the Cretaceous Triassic boundary, when all the dinosaurs went extinct, all the lineages that survived that extinction were toothless lineages, and so the birds that we have today don't have teeth. But just looking at the shape and the size of the beak can tell you a lot about what a bird eats. So, for example, all nectarivorous birds, birds that live and eat a lot of nectar, have thin, pointy beaks, like this hummingbird here and a sunbird right here. Birds that eat really fast moving prey where they have to jab and catch something really quickly have thin but sort of wider beaks, like this stork right here, the kingfisher right here, and the tern right here. These are all birds that have evolved independently for millions of years, but have convergently evolved similar size, similar shaped and beaks, because they eat the same things. Another great example is these grosbeaks and these finches. So the grosbeaks are cardinalids, and finches are, of course, finches. They have evolved really big beaks that are really high, that can apply a lot of pressure, top-down pressure, to crush hard seeds. So if you see a bird that has a very deep beak, that means it eats something that is very, very hard. Similarly, check out the beak of the finch here and this parrot here, parrot or parakeet species. So this parakeet also has a very deep beak, which means that it can put a lot of pressure on anything that's between its beak. And if you've had a parakeet at home, I'm sure you know how bad it hurts when they bite you. The last type of beak are hooked beaks, right? So a lot of birds that catch other birds or catch other animals for a living have hooked beaks, and hooked beaks are found in cormorants, in this caracara, in owls. They have all evolved these hooked beaks independently of each other, because they are all animals that eat other animals. But beaks are not just two things. One is beaks are not just meant for finding and eating prey. They're also the air conditioners of the bird. So here's a great example of a toucan that is actively radiating heat out of its beak. And so toucans can use their beaks as radiators, so they can push a bunch of blood into that beak, and that blood then gets cooled down by the air outside, and birds use their beaks as radiators to shed heat. Birds also have the ability to move their beaks. So you might think that those beaks are rigid, but in fact, birds have the ability to move those beaks, just like this Godwit is doing. And that type of beak behavior, where they can move the tips of their beak, is called rhynchokinesis, which is beak movement. Birds have an incredibly efficient respiratory system that is made up of air sacs and lungs. So in mammals, air sacs, or lungs rather, we have lungs that expand and contract as we breathe. But bird lungs are rigid and don't expand and contract with their breath. But what does expand and contract are these air sacs. But the cool thing is that as the air they breathe passes through the air sacs, bird lungs actually get fresh air during both inhalation and exhalation. And so they've found this beautiful way of making breathing really efficient by getting fresh air during both inhalation and exhalation, because the air sacs are getting full of fresh air, and the fresh air is moving between the air sacs. So, speaking of airways, we produce sound. I'm talking to you right now because I'm using an organ called the larynx to produce sound. And the larynx sits up here, right here in my throat, right? And so the sound I'm producing is through my throat. But Birds make sound from an organ called a syrinx, which sits at the bifurcation of the trachea into the lungs. And so they have the unique ability to make two sounds at the same time. And as a singer, I'm really jealous of birds, because birds can potentially sing in two octaves at the same time. And that's why birds can produce these extremely complicated sounds, which vary in pitch and volume and frequency, because they have these two syrinxes that are producing sounds simultaneously. So, how do you digest food if you don't have teeth? We break down our food by chewing it, right? So we masticate our food and start digesting our food in our mouth, because our saliva is full of digestive enzymes, and we are chewing that food and then swallowing it, and so that our stomach can break it down. Well, birds don't have teeth in their mouth, but they sort of have teeth in their stomachs. So a bird also has an esophagus, like we do, but they have what is called a gizzard. So birds have a thing like a what is called a crop, and a lot of birds use that crop to quickly eat a lot of things, while there's no predators watching, or if there's a big pile of grains, this chicken will go and quickly eat the pile of grains without even handling the grains, and then slowly it'll pump that grain out into the stomach at a rate that the stomach can actually get the grain. And so a lot of birds have this crop. Birds, they will also keep grain or food in that crop, so that they can again regurgitate it for their offspring. The gizzard is a really cool thing, because birds will actually swallow small stones that act like teeth, and then the gizzard is used to crush those small stones into a paste, and then can be digested. There's a One of the coolest birds in the world is a bird called the hoatzin that lives in the Amazonian rainforest, and it's cool for several reasons. But the anatomical coolness of it is that it is actually the only specialized leaf-eating bird in the world, and it has this incredibly well-adapted crop, where just like cows, they have bacteria that break down the leaves in their crop, and then they swallow the broken down quote unquote cud that their stomachs extract nutrients from. So hoatzins have a super specialized crop, which has a cool microbiome which helps them digest cellulose and leaves. Birds sort of excrete undigestible parts of their food in two ways. One is that they poop out uric acid, but they also sort of regurgitate what are called pellets. And you must have seen this with owls, but a lot of other birds, shorebirds and kingfishers and eagles, and even normal songbirds will often regurgitate pellets, which are undigestible parts of animals. The animals or plants that they have eaten, like seeds or like hair and bones. And so they have the ability to make it into a hard pellet and then excrete out the pellet. These pellets are really good for understanding the diet of birds. Birds have an incredibly flexible digestive system. So here's an example of a white-throated sparrow, Zonotrichia albicollis, that lives in North America, where the the length of the intestine is totally dependent on how much food they require. So when they live in cold regions or during cold times of the year, they will actually expand the length of their uh, digestive system to make sure that they extract every last nutrient from the food that they're eating. So here in a paper by McWilliams and Karasov, they showed that birds that were kept at minus 20 degrees Celsius had longer intestines. Birds that migrate will also do that. So because having large organs means that you need more calories, a lot of long distance migrants will actually absorb their intestines back and into really tiny intestines while they are migrating, and then regrow their intestines to be normal size so that they can start feeding again once they've reached their wintering grounds or their summer grounds. Bird reproductive anatomy is in many ways very similar to mammals, but also very different from mammals. So they have only one sort of exit point for poop, for urine, and for excreta, for urine, and for their gametes, which is called the cloaca. And birds copulate by what is called cloacal kissing, where the male deposits sperm in the female's cloaca for to fertilize her. And cloaca are typically just inwards, but a lot of birds will produce what are called cloacal phalluses. So a lot of ducks, a lot of ratites like emus and cassowaries and ostriches, and a lot of galliforms like chickens have what is called what looks like a bird penis, but it's just sort of an everted cloaca. The longest cloacal phallus is on the lake duck, which is a bird that lives in South America, where the cloacal phallus is actually longer than the bird itself. And as you can see in this image, it is corkscrew shaped, and it's a really long corkscrew shaped phallus that the bird uses to copulate with the female. There is a lot of actually fun research done on the sperm anatomy of birds also, and the sperm anatomy of birds tells you how promiscuous birds are. So here's an example of a bird in the genus Uria, which is alcid. So they are common murres and auks. They are often very strongly pair bonded, and so they have a very small sperm with a very tiny tail. But other birds that have a lot of extra pair copulations, or so a lot of promiscuity, have sperm that have really long tails, so they can compete against other male sperms. So there is, again, this is just to tell you that there is a lot of anatomy that we're not going to talk about that is still very interesting in birds. So the female anatomy again is very similar. Females have a uterus and ovaries, just like mammals and other reptiles, and they form one egg every day. So typically, from ovulation to laying, it takes about 25 hours for a egg to develop. And so most chickens will also lay only one egg every day, and that that is a metric that we biologists use to find out when a bird started laying. So, for example, if you go to a nest, in this case, it's a blue tit nest, and you see 3, 6, 9 eggs. Because each egg takes 25 hours to produce, I can tell that this female started laying 9 days ago. And so you can backtrack when a nest was initiated and then predict when the chicks will hatch out. So most birds lay one egg, can lay only one egg in a 25-hour period. Birds have incredible hearing. So although they don't have external ears like us, they have really, really good hearing. And owls are probably one of the birds with the best hearing. And some owls actually have a facial disc and asymmetric ears. And so here's the a description show like a cartoon image of a owl that shows these asymmetric ears, which allows them to pinpoint the location of a sound source. And owls use this expertly. So there's a owl called the great gray owl, which is found across North America and Russia, and they have the ability to pinpoint where a mouse is several feet below the snow, and then they can track that from over 100 feet away and fly and dive into the snow and catch mice only by listening to them. Birds also echolocate. Some birds also echolocate like bats do, and so they use sound and they hear the echoes to pinpoint the location of their nests or pinpoint the location of other birds. And so while swifts also echolocate, so the edible swiftlet that lives in the Andaman Nicobar Islands or off the coast of Konkan can also echolocate. The example I'm going to give you here is of a really fun bird called an oil bird. These oil birds are related to nightjars, but they are not in their own family now. But oil birds are nocturnal, not completely nocturnal, but they're nocturnal frugivorous birds. They're the only bird that is completely nocturnal and yet eats mostly fruits, and they eat mostly palm fruits. And oil birds live in caves where they breed, where they make nests on the cave, on the walls of the caves, and they find their nests by echolocation. Birds see, birds are tetrachromatic, so we have three types of rods and cones to detect color, and so there is, but birds are tetrachromatic, so they have four sensors for color, and so they can see in UV light, right? So they can see each other not only in the visible color spectrum that we see, but also in the UV spectrum. And so here's a photo of budgerigars, very common pet birds, and you can find photos of budgerigars or budgies anytime you Google them. But budgies have this really highly reflective cheek patch on their face. It's highly UV reflective only. So this might look like a dark patch on their cheeks, but it's actually bright in UV light. And having that, because we don't see in UV light, it makes it very hard to actually even imagine what a bird sees when they are looking at something with tetrachromatic vision. We think that a lot of birds can tell each other's sex, especially the birds that are monomorphic, which means that they look very similar to, where we can't tell the males and females apart. We believe that they can tell each other, they can tell the sex of other birds by looking at the UV reflectance of their feathers. And that is true for the bird I study here at Archbold. I study the Florida scrub jay, where the males and the females are completely identical to us, but they can tell each other very easily, probably using the variation in how their feathers are reflecting UV light. So bird eye size or eye anatomy is also driven by their ecology. And this again goes back to showing that every part of a bird's body is driven by what they do and how they do it. And so we started with B6, the godwit, that flew, thousands and thousands of kilometers, and its carina is really well, it has really strong flight muscles and a long beak to help it find prey under the sand. It has a deeply keeled carina to attach those big flight muscles to fly. But it has a relatively small eye because it may not be using its eye for finding food. But other birds do. So here's a cool paper on the eye size. So somebody literally calculated this size of the eye compared to the head of the bird and showed, so this in this paper by Hall and Ross, they showed that nocturnal birds typically have bigger eyes, which is not surprising, but it's really cool to show that nocturnal birds have bigger eyes. Not only that, Ian Osprey in a really cool paper in 1921 showed that even birds that are terrestrial, even birds that are otherwise diurnal, their eye size is driven by their ecology. So here is a graph where the understory birds that live in the dark understory of rainforests had significantly larger eyes than birds that lived in the canopy or in open habitats. So again, their ecology drives the anatomy of many birds. And here's a classic photo of a common potu, another nightjar-like bird, but they're in their own family now, called Nyctibius chryseus, is the gray Nyctibius. And look at how huge their eyes are and how they're like pointing out. Crazy birds. Bird eyes go even one step further. They can see right above them. So imagine us, I'm looking at you straight up, right? I can't see what's happening on the ceiling right now, but there's a bird that actually can do that. So uh, that bird is the African harrier hawk. And here's a graph from a paper by Portugal et al. In Current Biology that shows where the uh, gymnogen or harrier hawk can actually see. So here is their visual field. So this we might think that the bird is looking straight into this cavity or straight in at this tree, but this bird is probably looking at the like I think insect nest right here or up in the cavity right here. So African harrier hawks, unlike other raptors, which maybe see a little bit above them, but not a lot, just like us, we can turn our eyes up and see a little bit above us, right? But African harrier hawks can look directly above them, so they can stare at the ceiling without breaking eye contact with you. Isn't that cool? So that's the end of the bird anatomy lecture. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I hope it gives you newfound appreciation for birds and their anatomy. Thank you for watching.